everyone. Welcome to the 379th episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have a kind of a lot to talk about. It's the middle of July, so it's a bit of a slow news week. We had the holiday weekend, but we've got stuff on keeping your smart home secure and keeping it private. We'll talk about the costs, the benefits, the trade-offs, what you really can and can't keep private. We're also going to be talking about an update for y'all on network segmentation because it's such a popular question that we get asked. And we're going to be talking about Sigfox. Maybe this is the final update. It sounds like it. The FCC has done some approvals that are worth talking about for the IoT satellite market. And we've got a little bit of an update on smart things. And I thought I would share with y'all some of the useful IoT gear for vacations, since I should let you know I'm doing this show from Paris. Woo!
Oui, oui.
Where I am speaking. Yeah, I'm speaking at an event. But then I decided when life gives you business trips, you turn it into a vacation. So that's what I'm doing. It's mostly when life gives you business trips to Paris, I guess. We are also going to hear from our sponsor. We've got a new one, Influx Data. And our guest this week is Vijay Sankaran, who is the CTO at Johnson Controls. We are going to be talking about smart buildings and sustainability. So all of this and more await you. But first, let's hear from another new sponsor. This week's sponsor is Intent. Are you developing an app for a connected device? When you partner with Intent, you don't just work with a build team. We act as a think partner to guide your hardware project to success. Intent has 12 plus years of experience in delivering stunning IoT and connected device projects, including the Aura Ring, Bose and Macintosh in-car entertainment systems. And they have an extensive background in mobile and web app development, firmware and hardware, and they help design and build software solutions for the world of connected devices, from net new ideas to products entering an established niche. You can check out their success stories at withintent.com/portfolio. Okay, Kevin, let's get cracking. So I got to say, there is not a lot of big news in the smart home or smart IoT world this week, with the exception of some LoRaWAN stuff coming out of the conference. Unfortunately, I've been really sick and have not been down to the conference yet. I will have to pack all my reporting into Thursday, which is fine.
Well, hopefully you can actually fly home this time from this trip, since the last two trips you kind of had to stay put for a while.
Yes. Well, no one left in my family can get COVID, so I'm hopeful.
Then again, there are worse places to be stuck in than Paris.
Yeah, but those places are substantially cheaper, although the butter is not as delicious. So I feel like this week is kind of like we're still talking about a lot of stories that have happened earlier. So one is privacy, and I feel like the media is really looking at privacy in the wake of Roe v. Wade getting upturned or overturned by the Dobbs decision. And that happened at the end of June. So we talked a lot about that last week and like why companies want this data, why they're not going to stop tracking it. Google actually said that they were going to delete data related to people visiting abortion clinics. Mm-hmm. So federal governments couldn't access it, or state governments rather couldn't access it. And a lot of people were like, yay. And I was like, I mean, it would be better if they didn't collect that in the first place, because you could always have employees can go through and be like, hey, you get one righteous employee who thinks it's the right thing to do to share this data, and then poof, it happens. It is much better to never collect it than to go back later and delete it.
Yeah, but the thing is, I mean, it seems like it's always been an all or none in terms of data collection. So we can pick and choose what we might not want tracked, but kind of everything is tracked. Like if you're searching for stuff, if you're not doing it in an incognito window or through some private browser types or Tor, exactly. Then that data is going to be collected no matter what it is you're searching for, right? You know, I'm happy to see Google take this step, but this is going to add a lot of questions about other things that maybe we don't want tracked, and will they do the same for those things? And honestly, Google is only one piece of the puzzle. It's a big part of it, but just cell phone location, that's just always been available or made available to third parties here in the US anyway.
Well, let me throw some things out here because I actually had this great conversation months ago with Mark Ralston at Argo Designs. And he used to be, I think, the chief creative officer at Frog before he started Argo. And then Argo, I think, got acquired. Anyway, the point is, he and I had a really interesting conversation about creating this concept of a privacy bubble. And the idea behind it is you could basically turn on some sort of jamming device when you want it to be private. And the implications of this are it'd be the equivalent of shutting everything down while you did a particular, it's what people thought incognito mode was when they were on the internet, right? So, you'd be like, oh, I'm going to do something sketchy. Let me go to incognito mode. That's not actually what incognito mode is about, y'all, but that's fine. So he was saying they should do that. And I can see the benefit of creating something like this. And then that puts the onus back on companies to offer something in exchange for getting access to that location. And I think, in all honesty, when I'm getting like Waze or something like that, I wouldn't actually turn on my privacy mode very often if we're being real, right? Because I feel like I get too much benefit from sharing this data. And so I think it would be an interesting, yes, there are some people who would be like, screw Waze. I don't want to share that.
That's up to them. That's fine.
Those people who are already out there like that, they're like not sharing their location data. They're printing out paper maps. This is literally what my mom does when she gets in the car with me with her printed out maps. It drives me absolutely bonkers.
Yeah.
But that's okay. I mean, there are people who do that. And have I told her that her phone is still tracking her location?
Yeah. And again, that's where I was going to go, because I love the idea here, the concept here, but it's still like
federal regulators would have to enforce this, and they'd have to make it easy. So we'd have to have a way to say, and it'd have to probably be built into the OS settings like Apple or Google. So Apple, Google, Samsung would have to build this into their phone, and it would literally just turn off this data. Yes, you could still subpoena data from cell phone tower location pings, but we have a process in place that does it require a warrant or a subpoena?
And I don't know.
Yeah, I'm like, this is not something I remember. Anyway, I think it's worth thinking about.
Yeah, it is worth thinking about. I worry. I mean, you just hit upon the head on the mobile aspect, and I literally don't allow location on for any apps all the time. It's only in Apple. It's only when I use the app. So I choose.
Me too.
Yeah, but that's only for the app getting that data, and it's not for the phone itself. And the same would go for at home. Your ISP, whether you use incognito mode or whatever, they still see they're routing that traffic somewhere. They need to know where they're routing it to and where they're routing it from. So there's a lot of moving parts here that would need to be addressed.
Yes. I'm not saying it'd be easy, but I am saying it'd be really an interesting concept.
There's another aspect though, and that is, can that anonymizer be used for bad purposes? That's the other problem. How do you manage that?
Yes, but privacy can always be used for bad purposes. And to say that we don't deserve privacy because it can be used for bad purposes is like the definition of a panopticon, right?
Right.
So I'm like, yes, it could be used for bad purposes, but that's kind of that's a straw man argument. I would also say that I would love it to be like a personal jamming device, in all honesty, but I would like it to be backed by protected by laws, like a consumer right is that you could create a privacy blind for yourself in your home, even from your connected devices. And yeah, it means that some things may not work as intended, but it would also mean that you are private.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is just a thing. Instead of that, what we are getting is the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which they published an article all about keeping your smart home secure and private. And of course, I had to read this. And I came away from it and I was like, oh, holy cow, this is a lot of work. And a lot of our audience is already doing this work, believe it or not. This is the audience segment that's like, hey, we love local. So their first recommendation is, hey, go local when you can. Actually, their first recommendation is check out what data your devices send and then decide if you want to buy them.
Yes, exactly.
And then once you do that, they recommend a local hub that will handle your smart home automations. And they specifically recommend a privacy-centric one that is said that they will be private. So they recommend Habitat and Home Assistant are two that they feel really confident about.
No argument for me. I mean, we've said for years local would be preferred from a data privacy standpoint. So I'm totally on board with what they're saying.
And I like this article also because this writer reminds y'all, hey, if you don't connect your thing to the cloud all the time, make sure you're going to remember to do regular software updates. So you're going to have to network it occasionally and make sure you're downloading updates, which thank you, because you don't always think about that.
Yeah.
They don't really point this out, but you are going to have a loss of functionality. Like right now, there are companies like Mycroft is an open source voice assistant that can be run locally. Their Mimic 3 engine just came out last week. Josh.ai has a local assistant, although they only work with fancy integrators. So you won't be able to do like voice control.
I was just going to say, this takes away one of the biggest or most used features or functions of today's smart home, and that is voice control. Because if you're using it, it's connecting to the cloud for the most part. I know there's a transition going on right now with moving a lot of that Amazon, Google, Apple functionality, voice functionality to local, but it's not 100% right now, and it's going to take some time before it is.
Yes. And even then, Matter is, and again, this person makes the point that Matter is local and it is focused on security, but there's not a lot in there about privacy. And they're right, there isn't.
Yep.
So, for example, on the hubs, like the Hue bulbs use a private Zigbee mesh that the Hue hub controls, and you can actually take the Hue hub offline. By that, I mean you basically inside the app and the phone, you say, do not allow remote access. And then the hub and the bulbs don't ever talk to the cloud. You'll lose functionality, like you won't be able to control them when you're outside of your house, but you can control them inside the house from your phone.
Yeah.
But not with a voice assistant again. A lot of products already use a Zigbee or a Z-Wave hub. You can plug in dongles for like Habitat. I think Home Assistant, there's a dongle. And that was really it. And they did this, again, I recommend you look at this article. The tech savvy among us might find some good tips. I think most normal people are going to be like, what? Why? No.
Yeah, it's too DIY for, I think, the mainstream folks. Although I think both of those products that were mentioned have made great strides in making it a little more approachable over the past 2-3 years.
Oh yeah. No, those are good products. And I think any normal person could do it. I just don't think they will want to.
Yes.
So
I agree. Yep.
And
Yep.
I think this lack of trust and privacy is really concerning to people. And you pulled out a survey from a company called Mortgage Cadence that talks about this.
Yeah. This is a new survey that had polled 900 Americans across the country. They want to know, what are the top smart tech devices in your household? And televisions was the number one. And that's not surprising because just about every TV these days is a smart TV. It's hard to buy a non-smart TV. I don't even know if you can, or at least one that would be worth buying. But lots of folks with speakers, lights, doorbells, thermostats, etc. One thing that was missing out of that list of what's in their homes was security. I'm really surprised. They have a smoke alarm in there. 10% have a smoke alarm. 29% have a doorbell. But there was no...
I think it's because people, only about 20% of American homes have security systems. So that's one. So not a lot have it. And then a lot of people still have this weird bifurcation. Like if you have a security system, they don't think of it as a smart home. In honesty, they probably shouldn't because most of the older security systems are not really smart. They're just basically like an alert that goes out and is generally professionally monitored as opposed to being something that's going to set off any sort of chain reaction or be proactive, like saying, oh, you're not at home. Let's turn your lights on and off in a random pattern.
This is true. And talking about which voice assistants, since we were just talking about voice control, I'm not terribly surprised by these numbers. Out of the survey results, 55% use Amazon, 32% use Apple, and 22% use Google. I'm kind of surprised in a way that more people are responding saying they use Apple versus Google. But then again, it's kind of US is fairly iPhone centric. It's about 50-50, but I think maybe a little bit in favor of Apple. But then there are 90 people apparently, because out of 900, 10% say they use Cortana. I'm like, really?
Did Microsoft? I thought Microsoft killed Cortana.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Maybe it's on their Surface
you still.
Pros.
I was just going to say, on a PC or something. I don't know, but whatever floats your boat. Most people use the voice assistants for, or wish they had voice assistant capabilities for lights. I'm like, did they mean they want it built into the lights, or
Maybe it's just too complicated. Maybe they want a lighting platform from Amazon
maybe,
or yeah. I mean, basically, I
maybe?
took all of this as being like, they just don't know how this works and they're scared, so scared.
Yes, but I'll do the scared part first, and then I want to hit a figure that just blew me away. I agree with you on the scared part because the top reason to invest in smart tech, 64% said security and safety, which goes back to my, well, why aren't you asking, or why don't they have security systems? But that's a whole nother issue.
Yeah, maybe it's they don't care about the systems. Maybe they just wanted the smart doorbell, which is super popular. I don't, yeah, people are weird.
I
I read
suppose.
this and I was like, people are just
Well,
inconsistent. Who knows?
people are weird. We surveyed 900 weird people.
90 of whom are using Cortana,
in
who are
Cortana.
still in 2019. Okay, sorry. Yes, I'm distracting you from your very good story.
That's okay. You and I are far, far outliers on this next thing, but I'm still surprised. According to the survey results, Americans have spent an average of $1,172 on smart tech devices for their home. It says on average, they'd be willing to invest $2,475. So I guess I take away that they just haven't found products to fit their use cases, or they're just not sure what products can do. I don't know. We buy everything, so we would.
Yeah, I'm like, well, but I've slowed down my buying a lot because I'm just kind of sick of it because
Same.
nothing's working well.
Yeah.
So I'm like, but maybe that's what it is. They're like, this isn't going according to plan. And it's also hard, like, to spend a lot of money on. It's easy to spend a lot of money on something that feels like it costs close to that. So, like, it's easy to spend that much on a video doorbell because we don't really know what a video doorbell costs, right? We know that a dumb doorbell, which is very different, is pretty cheap, or it could
Yes.
be. So when someone says, let's pay $250 for a video doorbell, we're like, okay, sure. But if someone says,
Sounds good.
let's pay $250 for a smart lock when an existing lock you can buy for like $50, they're like, no. So maybe I feel like there's probably a disconnect there too. Like price.
That could be, and I get that way when I see some of these smart locks going for $250, even $299. It gives me pause, and I'm into this stuff, so I get it. I do get it. And this final bit that I want to bring in, top concerns, and there are all the concerns you would think people would have with smart homes. Some of them we've been talking about: security and data collection, etc. But the top concern, 76% said it's privacy. So, and they're also afraid of getting hacked, which would then impact their privacy. And 62% top answer was security systems or a security camera being hacked. So they want security, they're willing to pay for it, but they don't trust those products the most, or they trust them the least in a sense.
Yeah, I think they're right to trust them the least. One, because the potential for harm is so great. Two, because individuals are bad at managing security regardless. I mean, think how long most people probably still don't have MFA on their cameras, for example, even though everyone who has a camera should. And then three, companies do not make it, or historically haven't made it very easy. So if you want a hard thing to do, Kevin has been working on three ways to fortify your home network. Because other than, I'm like, this is one of the top questions we get on the IoT podcast hotline. I mean, just constant.
It is. And I know a lot of people who listen to the show probably already do something to fortify their home network, because that's the front door to your smart home, essentially, right? Metaphorically speaking.
If you think of every device as a window into your home network, it's like not having something is like basically not ever checking to see if your windows are even locked.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Or even letting someone new just carve a new window into your house.
Yep. So I am working on a story that's probably more of not a how-to, but more of these are different approaches you can take. So I don't know, maybe we'll talk about that next week. It'll be on the site as well. But what got us thinking about this was a recent article on Make Use Of on what is network segmentation. And at a high level, I mean, if you're using a guest network for all of your IoT devices, in a sense, you have segmented the IoT device network from your regular home network. But there are other ways to do that without a guest network. You could do virtual LANs. You could create different subnets for your network. So there's different individual networks that don't talk to each other, but they can still talk to the internet.
Devices.
So this was just a good article on explaining what network segmentation is. And to be fair, it's not going to really protect your IoT devices per se, but it's going to keep any hacks from your IoT devices from affecting anything else in your home, such as your computers, your phones, your tablets, your TVs, potentially, depending on how you have your network set up. So it's kind of just a way to set up, I'll call them firewalls essentially, between certain types of devices. So I actually don't do this. I should think about it again, but do you use a guest network or a separate network for yours,
I
Stacey?
don't, because I lose functionality associated with my phone coming in and on as an indicator of certain devices. And then some devices I want to
Yeah.
be on my like accessible network.
Right. No, right. A perfect example is if you have your devices on a guest network and you're using a phone app to control them, but your phone app is on your regular home network, you may not be able to access the devices to control them at that point. You might be able to do it, but that would bring it through the cloud, and that kind of adds a whole nother threat vector in a sense from a privacy standpoint. So I haven't gone the guest network route in a long time for that reason.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to like I used to have a lot of automation set up, and my phone entering or leaving the house was the trigger for it.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I'm thinking about it, because I've added more sensors to my home, and soon my sensors will actually be able to tell, they'll be able to talk to more devices in my home, hopefully if they're Matter compliant, then I can
Mm-hmm.
actually, maybe I could revisit this. I don't know. We'll have to file that away with things that might change with Matter, but that's a
Yep.
long list. Okay, now it is time to talk about Sigfox. Oh, again. Basically, this is just a little bit of an update. Once again, James Blackman at Enterprise IoT Insights is doing all the reporting on this. Thanks, James. And if y'all remember a company called Unibiz, it's a Singaporean company, they ended up buying the assets of Sigfox. And basically, all of that is now taken over. So,
So they went into receivership and they were purchased and they continue on.
yes, well, they kept the Sigfox brand. What's interesting to me is how long they'll do that. Sigfox is a low power wide area networking technology. So it competes with things like LoRa or Amazon's theoretical sidewalk network that is being built, but will take a while. And they use Sigfox, it's its own proprietary network. And so I imagine they wanted to keep the brand because that's important because of the proprietary network. But everything else is going to be under the Unibiz name, and Sigfox will be part of the Unibiz family. And I'm really curious if that means, if from a technology perspective, it would be challenging to integrate Sigfox wireless network into Unibiz's wireless network, but maybe over time that could
Mhm.
happen. I've been asking people about it, and they're
Right.
like, oh, it'd be a pain, but I guess anything's doable. So it's kind of like, ugh. Okay. Other network news. The FCC is letting Starlink offer internet services on moving vehicles. This is not for your car. This is more for like RVs and campers. We get a lot of questions about people on that. And I just thought it's worth noting, mostly because they've talked about Starlink. It's mostly a broadband internet service, but they have talked about providing IoT capabilities. And if you're a camper and you want to have smart tech in your camper, then you are going to need internet service on your RV. Starlink does offer an RV service, but it's not designed for use when someone's moving, and this particular service is. So it could also be used for like tracking, I suppose. Yay. We also have news from SmartThings. Yeah, and I did start using SmartThings like in a couple weeks. Expect a updated review of the whole platform. But they've released a big update for the SmartThings app, and it will be coming out soon. And Kevin, you want to tell us what it's going to feature?
Yeah, much of it is in preparation for new Samsung devices, such as their new foldable phones and the newest Android version. But from a end user smart home standpoint, one of the really neat things is they're adding support for Philips Hue Sync. And I know we just talked about Philips Hue, but we got to mention this again because This is a product I use every day. It's actually, Stacy, you bought me a piece of hardware, the Sync hardware. And what it does is it synchronizes Philips Hue lights with audio and video inputs. So when I'm gaming on my PC, I've got Philips Hue play bars behind the monitor. And whenever the game changes colors, there's explosions, etc., these lights synchronize with that and the whole wall lights up. I also use it for movies. It's amazing how low latency it is. It works really well. But this is going to be added to smart things as well now. So I presume that you won't need the Sync hardware that I have. It'll just be built in somehow to Samsung Smart Things. They will also be adding a gentle wake up routine, which is also something I use with some HomeKit supported bulbs. Well, actually, I think they might be the Hue bulbs. In fact, they are. They gradually change the brightness or dimness based on the time of day. So that's kind of neat. But this will do this as a gentle wake up routine.
Nice. I actually love the Hue routines, and not a lot of things support them because Hue really wants to make you not make you download their software, but they know what they're doing, and they're like, that's how they're going to differentiate their platform. By the way, we mentioned this in the newsletter, but it's worth mentioning on the podcast. George Yanni, who is one of the co-founders of Philips Hue, he's at Signify, which is the company that owns the Hue brand. It's not Philips anymore, it's Signify that owns it. George mentioned that for now, Hue bulbs are not going to support Thread, which Hue uses a Zigbee network. So this was kind of surprising. They're going to stick with their Zigbee network. He basically was like, I don't know how Thread's going to perform at scale. We know our Zigbee mesh works really well. We've been developing it for 10 years to make it work really well. So we're going to hold off on that. But you'll get Matter support through the Philips Hue controller, so the bridge device. And that means those lights will need to be connected to the cloud. Oh my gosh, we've gone full circle there.
Yes,
That's their Matter plan for now. And as part of that, he also mentioned like all the lighting recipes and stuff that people use. That's not part of Matter. So you'll have to use the Philips Hue app to take advantage of that. Again, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's the update there. I guess now, so I'm away from home. My family's still there, but eventually they're going to come and join me. And I thought it's worth talking about. There's two angles to this. One is we talk about consent a lot on the show and realizing that when you add smart home devices to your home, you need to like make sure that the people in the home consent to them. And there's two, just, hey, Stacy, what do you use when you go on vacation to keep an eye on your home or that sort of thing? So I always love when I go on business travel because I can see things in my home that we have set up that maybe inadvertently sending information about what's happening in the home when I'm away from home that people may not want to share. So then I'm like, oh crap, I didn't realize it did this. I should totally tell people. Mm-hmm. So that's always a good check. And again, a nice thing to do to people and a good best practices is when you buy a smart home device or beforehand, find out what data it collects and how it shares that data so you can share that with the people in your home so they know what's happening. My daughter was not aware that our oven sent pictures of everything she made to her father. And she didn't like it, so he turned that off.
Yeah. We had that conversation with the June oven as well. And I think I mentioned this on a show not too many episodes ago. Yeah, the girls hate it when I'm like, oh, you're cooking steak because I got a photo of it or whatever. No.
Yeah, and I kind of hate it that my husband gets a doorbell notification whenever I go out early in the morning to walk the dog. He's like, I love it because it makes me feel so connected to you. And I'm like when he's on travel, and I'm like, yeah, I guess, but then you also know when I wake up and you see me all scuzzy in my pajamas.
Yep. Always watching.
Yeah. So speaking of cameras, things that we don't have cameras inside our house. All our cameras face outwards and many of them don't actually, they're not on because I don't care. But when we go on vacation, we always set up Arlo cameras, a Nest Cam. I have a Wise Cam running around. And I do it just to kind of test out the functionality of the devices too, kind of regularly keep your eye on it. So we set all of those out in various areas, both inside and outside the house. And we have housekeepers. So when they come, we let them know that there are cameras on. My husband hates that I do that, by the way. He would like to not bring their attention to it. which I don't know. How do you?
Oh, well, I would have to.
Yeah, that's how I feel. I feel like it's really unethical. I trust my housekeepers.
Yeah.
We don't have cameras in and on if we're not home and they're there. It's only when we're on vacation. So I'm like,
No, they should know. I mean, that's being transparent. Personal choice. If somebody, if listeners say I don't want them to know, that's fine. I'm not going to disagree with you. I'm just saying I would have to do it and make sure they're comfortable.
yes. So that is that. So, and then the other thing we use is I check in on our water heater and I check in on our water metering system from Finn. It's not something I install before we go on vacation, but it is something that I keep an eye on during vacation. And I also have the Hue lights I set on their vacation mode, which then picks its randomized patterns based on our lighting patterns. So I have that turned on. And then I, of course, set my thermostat to vacation mode a little early so it figures it out and I save a little bit more energy. I'm trying to think, is there anything else that I do?
Your main point about doing like an audit of this type of stuff when you're away is really good. And I feel like I should do it. The problem is I feel like I haven't left the home in years. I mean, literally, I go outside. Yes, I go shopping and whatnot, but we don't go anywhere because of COVID for the most part. We haven't done that. So this is a really good reminder to maybe even just go to a park and then see what kind of notifications you're getting and what's on and what's not.
Yeah, you can go into your phone and turn on your notifications for all of your smart devices for like a 24-hour period, and it would probably accomplish pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
So you just I feel like you pay more attention when you're out of town because you're seeking, I'm seeking information about my family because I miss them. Because again,
Right.
I like them.
Right.
Okay, that's enough of that. Now it is time for the Internet of Things podcast hotline, the section of the show where we hear from y'all, our listeners. And we have a sponsor back for the Internet of Things podcast hotline, and that sponsor is Silicon Labs. And Silicon Labs wants y'all to know about the Works With event that is happening in September. It has emerged as the go-to developer conference for building the skills needed to create impactful connected devices. And it's going to happen in September, as I said, and you can learn more at workswith.scilabs.com.
And it's a new month, so we've got a winner from last month's IoT voicemail.
Oh, that's right.
hotline.
And they're going to win we can never do this prize again because I can't figure out what to call it.
It's the Eve Aqua water controller.
Yes, this is a thing designed for your hose. So it goes out on the outside of your hose unless you remotely turn it on and off and monitor it. It is great for summertime gardening.
Works really well.
And our winner is Ari. So congratulations, Ari.
Yay.
And I will reach out to you and you'll learn that you won. All right. We also have a voicemail to hear, and this week's voicemail is from Brent. Let's hear it.
Hello, this is Brent. I am still pretty interested in learning a little bit of coding, especially with microcontrollers or small computers like Arduino or the Pi. Is there anything new? And I know things are hard to get. I think I can still get some versions of Arduinos. Is that still the best place to start? Thank you.
Okay, so I love this question because, well, I like to code. I'm still learning. I think I'm always going to be learning to code. It sounds like Brent wants to do IoT stuff, obviously, right? Like I code a lot of non-IoT stuff, but I have done some IoT things, such as turning my smart lights on when Bitcoin hit a certain value, or when we were recording and I shut the door to the office, there would be a red light outside that would turn on. You could, honestly, Brent, you could do these types of things with either of the product lines that you mentioned. You said Arduino, which would be microcontroller. You said Raspberry Pi, which is more of a low-powered traditional computer. The two of these product lines are actually blurring between each other because Arduino was really the go-to for a long time for creating IoT products, devices, prototypes, because of all the pinouts that you had on an Arduino. You had low-level access to the hardware because you typically program these in C or C++. now you've got the Raspberry Pi Pico. We just mentioned last week the new Pico W, which is a Raspberry Pi microcontroller with Wi-Fi built in to give you connectivity. You also get the pinouts. And when I say pinouts, that means you can connect sensors, hardwire sensors, or motors, or whatever you want that you want to connect to your project. So I don't think you could go wrong with anything that you've looked at. You said, is there anything new? I don't think I would look for new hardware. I think I would probably focus. Well, the only thing I could think of is Risk, but go ahead.
No, so I was thinking there's tons of platforms and developer devices. So like I mentioned this in the newsletter, they actually sponsored. So like the Nordic Semiconductor has their latest thingy, for example. Silicon Labs has a dev kit. NVIDIA has a dev kit. I would also look at those things. And if you have a particular project, like you might want to do a video camera. We had someone call in recently, and I don't know if we answered this on the air, but they were looking for a way to monitor their dishwasher, and they were thinking of using the LED light on it. And so like an OpenCV kind of installation on a board, it's probably a Pi, but you might, if you buy like the whole kit, you don't have to like do all of that yourself, all of the hardware implementation and firmware stuff. It comes ready-made. So I just want to throw out that like, if you can think of a project, you might actually find a dev kit that's super appropriate for it.
Yeah, that's a fair point, because the Arduino and the Pi, they're, I would say, very general purpose. You could use them for a lot of different things, but some of these dev kits have very specific use cases that might be of interest to you. And I don't think you go wrong. Maybe that is the answer, is to pick your project. Think about what it is you want to create, and that will dictate what hardware you want to get, And again, most of them use similar languages, whether it's C, whether it's MicroPython, Python, etc. Again, general purpose languages. You won't have wasted skill sets by learning those, because you can apply that to just about any type of coding project. So again, I don't think you can go wrong. I tend to use a lot of developer APIs for products. That's in fact what I did. I used the LifeX API to control the red bulb for those two projects that I mentioned. But you can go to Philips Hue, you can go to whomever, and most of these companies that make these products do have APIs so that you can create your own app or your own project with them. So you can't go wrong with either one, quite honestly.
Yeah. And I would actually probably look for a higher level dev kit personally. So that is just our advice to you. Hopefully it helps. If you guys have questions, please give us a call at 512-623-7424. Remember, when you call, you will be entered to win whatever prize we're choosing to offer this month. I currently don't know what that prize is, but I'll come up with something really awesome for y'all. And that concludes this segment of the show. But stay tuned for our guest, Vijay Sankaran, who is the CTO of Johnson Controls. We're talking about making buildings smart and what that means for everybody. But first, a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Influx Data. Hey everyone, we are taking a quick break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. And this week's sponsor is Influx Data, the makers of InfluxDB. And I have Brian Gilmore here with me. First up, why don't you tell me, what is InfluxDB?
Well, I think before we talk about InfluxDB itself, we should back up and talk about what time series data is. Time series data, it's all time-stamped. So simply any type of data that's time-stamped in some way, whether it's every hour, every minute, or every second. And that includes both regular time-stamped data, stuff that happens on a regular interval, and irregular stuff, which we call events. All IoT data today is time-stamped.
And why does a purposely built time series platform matter for IoT folks?
I mean, I think everybody's looking for scale and precision, and that is oftentimes very difficult to get with off-labeled or other applications, databases that aren't really designed for time series data. Our entire roadmap is completely focused on the needs of time series developers. And what we try to do is we try to sort of manage that roadmap and deliver capabilities that are critical for developers and operators who are working with, multi-million-dollar assets and operations.
And I saw you recently launched a new feature for Edge data replication. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. We're excited about it. Edge data replication is a new capability that we've built into version 2.2 of our open source distribution. It allows developers who have InfluxDB OSS as well as InfluxDB Cloud to unify them into a single vertically oriented and integrated time series platform. Add to this our ongoing efforts to unify APIs across all of those database offerings, whether it's in the cloud or in the data center or at the edge. And we now have a path for developers to build once and deploy anywhere. Because it's all managed within our database write path in our time series processing language called Flux, edge data replication is durable and scalable in ways we couldn't even imagine 2 years ago.
Why is edge data replication such a big deal for developing IoT apps?
Well, I think going back to that sort of purpose-built thing, this is exactly what we mean. IoT, especially enterprise and industrial IoT, are generally highly distributed from both a compute and storage perspective. Data has a point of origin, meaning a place where it's born, typically close by the sensor. A force of gravity, meaning that there's a drive to get to that data from a sort of application and script perspective. And it also has a half-life, meaning that it is most valuable sort of right at the point of generation, and that value declines generally over time. So our edge data replication does exactly this. It brings the horsepower closer to the sensor, and it gives developers and solution builders the ability to leverage their own resources deployed at the edge. And that opens the door for more advanced use cases with better and faster return on investment. Now InfluxDB should be looked at as a vertically integrated stack with edge and cloud together finally.
This sounds great. So where can people go to find out more about Influx Data and InfluxDB?
Sure. I think the best place to check it out is influxdata.com/Stacy-IoT.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Vijay Sankaran, who is the CTO at Johnson Controls. Hello, Vijay. How are you today?
I am doing fantastic, Stacey. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
I am really excited. I feel like the theme of 2022, I don't know if we're putting COVID behind us, but we're definitely looking beyond like safety in a pandemic world, and we're looking at sustainability, which, yay. So you're on here to talk about Johnson Controls' efforts in the smart building space. And I just want you to kind of lay out for people why we should be thinking about making our buildings more modern, more sustainable.
Absolutely, Stacey. When you think about the buildings that we've helped outfit over the years through HVAC systems, control systems, security systems, fire systems, all of them have had a distinct role in the function of a building, but they've been very domain specific in the way that they function. And, as we began to think through what our customers would want in the future, we really saw there being three distinct
And that
vectors
concludes
that
this week's episode of the Internet of Things
supporting
podcast.
the needs
Please join us
of
next
customers
Thursday,
that
and don't forget to
utilize building
subscribe.
spaces in the future.
And
Number one,
if you
that
can't
was
get
to
enough
enable
IoT news,
smart buildings.
I would
By
love for
smart
you to
buildings,
sign up
we
at
think about it as autonomy. We all
www.staceyoniot.com
know about the
for our
autonomous
weekly
vehicle, but what
IoT
about the
newsletter,
autonomous building,
where we
based
explain
upon the
all
density
kinds of
people
things
in
that
the
we don't even get
building,
to on the show.
Temperature in a building.
Once
what
again,
your
thank you
sensors
for
are telling
listening,
you about
and
different
please
aspects of the building.
subscribe.
How do you autonomously change the building environment in order to be able to respond to different changes in conditions in building to either create more safety or better comfort or better ventilation in building spaces? So one was the whole vector around smart buildings. Secondly, it's healthy buildings. You mentioned the post-COVID world, and as you go back into spaces, you're interacting with a lot of people, and while a large percentage of society has been vaccinated, you still have a situation where there are varying degrees of vaccinations. And when people come into heavily occupied spaces, they may want more ventilation, which has been shown to actually improve space conditions, and prevent the transmission of different variables in that environment. And then finally, sustainability, as people contemplate what we need to do, both in terms of driving energy efficiency for cost reasons, but more broadly in terms of reducing carbon emissions, the equipment and the materials that are used in building construction and building function contribute about 40% of greenhouse gases globally. And so, as we assess the opportunity in the building space, we said, okay, there's a need for a company like Johnson Controls with such a rich tradition around innovation and excellence in the building space to really help support the goals of our future customers.
And none of this is exactly new. So I remember talking to companies back in like 2013, 2014, who were very focused on lighting and switching out LED lights in office buildings and adding sensors when they put the LED lights in. And those sensors were all about occupancy and saving energy. And there was a whole bunch of companies doing that. And then we saw kind of the birth of companies that were thinking about HVAC emissions and companies that started with electricity monitoring. And I feel like something has changed because now we're looking at these instead of individual systems, we're looking at them as more of a coherent system. But since you're in this business, I feel like you probably could help us understand and what's different about today.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. I think historically, we've seen this across, many different industries as it relates to like connectivity and IoT, which is, hey, I'll just connect everything and then there'll be some value that gets created from that, right? Without really thinking about the other way around, which is what is the value that it creates and, does connecting it actually deliver the value? So we've taken a very distinctly outside in view to this, which is what problems can we help our customers solve through data, analytics, AI, digital experiences, and an overall software platform into OpenBlue, right? Starting from very specific things like, hey, I'm in a hospital, and if my chiller goes down, I have to actually take patients out of certain wings of the hospital and potentially like move them somewhere else because cooling in that particular wing won't support life-sustaining system. And so in developing our solution around OpenBlue connected chillers, we've kind of taken that into consideration, which is how do we enable the connectivity into the platform with those chillers and the necessary fault data and the necessary support structures in order to be able to actually optimize on those kinds of outcomes. And the same thing goes through with healthy buildings, where if I'm running a space where there's a heavy congregation of individuals coming, and I ask the question, hey, how can I ventilate this space better, but only for a period of time, so that I can optimize, the ventilation, but I'm not going to do that all the time because that space isn't fully utilized all the time. We use two different variables that sense the space occupancy, the energy consumption, as well as the output ventilation, which we can control autonomously to actually ventilate that space. So a lot more of it this time in terms of how we've developed OpenBlue is really customer in. There's a set of problems I want to solve in this new norm of driving more effective asset health and reliability, healthy spaces where my employees have a heightened sense of wanting to feel like they're in a clean environment and a disinfected environment to, hey, I need a path to actually decarbonize and get to net zero by 2035. And I need to understand what are the sources of those scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. So it really is, I'm just going to connect a bunch of stuff and hope what happens to much more of an outside in perspective of what problems are my customers looking to solve and how can I use a connected platform like OpenBlue to help them solve that. That's what's changed in my perspective.
And let's tackle it from the outside in. Let's say my goals are sustainability. What is the low-hanging fruit? Like, we'll divide it up between retrofit and new build, I suppose. What should I focus on? What makes the most sense?
We just launched a new solution called OpenBlue Net Zero Advisor, and that's something to just help companies get started, which is I go in, I connect my assets in the building using, an edge gateway device that, discovers the points in the building and can connect into the utilities panel to get the energy consumption data. I can get my utilities bill, which will automatically export up into the Net Zero Advisor solution. And within a couple of days, you're up and running and really can see your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions and what assets over time, are contributing to that. That we delivered that solution specifically because we know a lot of customers just want to start with that baseline scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, and then they can sort of augment it with other sensors, do more planning and what if type scenarios.
Are there particular types of buildings, maybe industries, maybe it's in parts of the country, buildings are so varied that there's a higher return on making them smarter than maybe other types of buildings?
I think, there's a direct correlation between the age of the assets that exist in a building and the level of both issues that you have as well as energy consumption that you have. We see a lot of companies that have either a portfolio of different buildings that are maybe part of a real estate holding trust where they say, okay, I don't have a good grasp around the energy consumption, or I have a hard time understanding when issues happen in different buildings. So I need kind of a single pane of glass that brings it all together. Or companies that say, I just think I can save money, energy efficiency by just, connecting to the assets in the space and the energy meters and being able to say, can you give me, a performance improvement guarantee around energy efficiency? So more specifically to your question, I would say it's generally building spaces that are not brand new, like probably where a lot of the assets are sort of in the 10-year range or maybe even a little bit older, that there's immediate value that they can see from an ROI perspective or an asset health perspective. The other piece where we see it is where people want to do like brand new smart building builds where from the get-go, they want to have everything instrumented so that they have full visibility into entirely how their campus is working. And we have several examples, especially in the Middle East, where there are companies that just want to go all in because they're making the investment and building out a new facility anyway, and they want to have it from the get-go. So those are sort of the two bookends that I would say where we get a lot of traction on the OpenBlue platform.
And because I assume you see a lot of this stuff, I would love to understand if you're a city manager or a regulator, are there things that should be built into building codes to help with sustainability, help with making this transition to smarter and better buildings?
We participate in a lot of the standards body. We participate in a lot of the guidance around building codes and other sorts of incentives and other sorts of best practices. But I wouldn't say that like we go in and say, okay, you need to outfit buildings with sensors or certain kinds of technology, right? We really believe in letting the customers drive the value proposition around, okay, this is what we can offer you in terms of optimizing on some of your objectives. That being said, I think what we're seeing from a lot of city-based environments is an enhanced focus around really codifying with customers, how are you achieving more goals around reduced emissions? Are you employing any smart technologies to help you in that light? Do you have energy efficient equipment, in your space as you're considering new builds and things like that? Those are the kinds of questions that we're seeing asked, and OpenBlue is in a good position to support those goals. So that's kind of how we've been interacting, with cities around giving them our perspective around, how technologies like OpenBlue can help and what we kind of see in the marketplace. And then, they codify, some of the objectives that they have around different things to reduce emissions and drive energy efficiency.
All right. And what kind of trends are you seeing in the smarter building space? What are the things that you feel like we need? And I'm thinking of things like, I think it would be great if we had kind of common language for sensors in buildings so IT and OT could kind of be a little bit more interoperable and talk to each other. And things like creating digital twins. I would love for my digital twins to be the same across an area. Or maybe if I'm a city, or a fire department in a city, I'd love to be able to have those digital twins accessible to me and not siloed out in different software platforms. So I'm just trying to think about, as I look forward, what are the things that will make lives easier and better for everyone as we make our buildings smarter?
Yeah, so I think this is a great question. So number one, I mean, like the edge and really driving consistency, intelligence, and security at the edge is like critically important, right? Because if you think about it, across all of these different technologies over the years, they all utilize different protocols like Modbus, BACnet, OPC, KNX. I mean, these are all protocols that have been like written for different domains over the years. So when we built Open Blue Bridge Stack, that was something that we actually have an open connector kit at the edge so that you can rapidly deploy connectors against these different types of protocols in the building equipment space. And then you can bring them into an edge stack, which basically takes the data, translates it into common format, both brick and a haystack. Brick is sort of a standard, you might have talked about brick in a previous podcast, but it's an industry standard around how you represent a digital twin, whereas haystack is more focused around asset tagging and what does that asset tell you and where is it coming from. So we have an ontology on our edge to kind of standardize that data. We believe that intelligence is really important right at the edge too, because if you think about the real-time nature of what's occurring in a building, if you're going to wait for all that data to get ingested up into the cloud and do analysis and then be able to send an alert where a building operator knows that something's going wrong, we actually have a strong belief that the edge should be independent, with in and of itself, to be able to basically have models that can run on the edge. And that's why we acquired a company called Foghorn, which really has specialized in edge AI and edge intelligence over the last 6 years, is that we can now take models that are developed in Python with a training set outside of the edge and then actually deploy it right on the edge in a micro footprint so that, let's say, as signals are coming in from a chiller, we're launching an offering around vibrational analysis. In real time, you really can say, hey, the vibrations on this chiller are excessive. And because of that, we want to immediately running that AI ML model on the edge continuously. And we're immediately sending an alert to an operator saying, hey, you need to do a graceful shutdown or reduce some of your set points because there's a potential that you could otherwise have some severe catastrophic failure that might result in extended downtime or extended cost for some of your equipment. So that's kind of really important in terms of what we've built in our stack. The third piece is like edge to cloud connectivity. But in terms of that edge to cloud connectivity, that's one of the most exposed areas just in terms of overall, cyber risk, because a lot of these equipment has been installed, over time. Some of the software might have vulnerabilities on it. So as you want to make sure that data and transmission and that edge is secure, we announced an acquisition for a company called Temper Security, which again on our edge runs an agent which has homomorphic encryption from the edge to the cloud, so that data pipeline where that gets pushed up into OpenBlue on the cloud is high grade encryption and is only accessible on a zero trust basis, where the person who's accessing it and the person who's communicating it, the resource, have verification that those are the only parties that can do it using homomorphic encryption throughout the transmission process. And so like that, the edge is incredibly important to us.
Okay, that covered a ton. Do you want to get into the cloud?
Yes, you talked about digital twin. And where we see a strong interest in value in digital twin is remote context. And so if you see that you have so many assets over large sets of campus assets, as an example, and let's say that you had an alarm or an alert occur, what we do with our digital twin is utilize the brick schema, which is an industry schema around digital twin, and we provide context for when alarms or alerts happen, so that you actually, can see, hey, this alert happened in this part of the facility. We have a major customer in Asia Pac where they've got a portfolio of real estate assets that happen across a portfolio of 130 plus buildings. And they basically have a need to be able to understand remotely. And these are buildings that are all across different parts of Asia. They need to have a visual way of understanding where specific alerts are happening in different building environments. By using the digital twin and ingesting the BIM files that represent those building structures, when alerts come through, they're able to overlay that on the digital twin and actually navigate where somebody coming in through a back door might have triggered an alarm, and then actually using like the assets from the camera to be able to rewind and look at footage and then potentially dispatch security, in that particular space. And so it's a lot of it is the context by which things happen and where it happens and the alerts that happen that really drive the value for that digital twin.
Excellent. All right. Well, Vijay, thanks so much for coming on the show this week. I really appreciate you sharing all of your thoughts about how we're going to make our buildings smarter, where we should start, and the implications of that.
Yeah, thanks very much for the opportunity, Stacey. It was great chatting with you.
And that concludes this week's episode of the Internet of Things podcast. Please join us next Thursday, and don't forget to subscribe. And if you can't get enough IoT news, I would love for you to sign up at www.staceyoniot.com for our weekly IoT newsletter, where we explain all kinds of things that we don't even get to on the show. Once again, thank you for listening, and please subscribe.